The first thing I do is try to study what business are they really in. They thought they were in one business. When I did the consumer research, they were in another. In trading cards, we had all of the athletic NBA, NFL, all of their licenses, and everybody said this is the athletic trading card business. I did the research, the consumer told me, and the kids said, "No, you're in the business of connecting heroes and their fans."
Well, for people who don't know who you are, why don't you give us a little rundown of your career and all the stuff that you have accomplished?
Okay. And I'll try to be brief, okay? Critical thing, I grew up on a farm in upstate New York. My father died when I was 2.5. I got very involved running the farm, learned entrepreneurship early, went to Cornell undergraduate and graduate school, then went to work for Carnation Company in the food business on the West Coast. Great place to learn and be in a training program and running early days of instant breakfast. Then I went to Hunt Weston Foods, more product development. And then I made a big shift. I spent quite a bit of time in the baking industry with a division of Continental Grain. And then I jumped shipped and I went to work for Mattel in the video game business. So out of baking right into the early days of video games, then started my own company in video games and went to the Silicon Valley, got Marvin Davis at 20th Century Fox Film Corporation to back me. And then I went from there to HBO to run the pre-recorded video cassette business at the beginning of the whole cassette business, and then to Reebok and to oversee the development of the Reebok pump, and then from there to do a turnaround in the trading card business called Skybox, then to the greeting card business called Gibson Greetings, and then to Parthenon in a senior partner in strategic planning. And now people say, "What are you doing now?" I have a toy business. So yeah, I'm still trying to figure out, Max, what I can do. So
I actually like it's funny you touched upon the pump shoes you worked on because I have actually have a pair. I had one in middle school, and then I bought another pair recently as well. It's the one where you pump and then there's air in the shoe and then it tightens. It basically gives you more grip on your feet, right?
correct. Yeah, they're internal bladders, so it completely form fits each one of your feet. Yes.
Yeah, awesome. The thing about your story, and I think it'll be relevant to a lot of my listeners, is about your reinvention, where you reinvent yourself multiple times. You went from farm to video games to shoes to media, really dived into a lot of industries. So, with that being said, for people who are listening who are looking to make a career change, whether it's changing roles or changing industries, how were you able to first be able to pivot into a new industry where you didn't have a lot of experience or any experience for that matter, and how you were you able to take the skills that you developed to adapt into your new role so you would hit the ground running?
Great. I have two millennial sons, and they call me, they say, "Dad, you're the original millennial." Because I was making these moves when it was considered disloyal as I was moving from industry to industry. The key thing first was I learned pretty quickly the common denominator for me was the consumer. And fortunately, for lots of reasons, I always had a great insight and stayed very close to the consumer. So every one of these businesses involved a consumer. So what I would do when I moved into another industry is, again, I was looking for where the real power was going to be someplace in new product development, going to be in consumer, going to be in marketing. And I found I could learn the industries pretty quickly. And the key was that I really knew how to understand the consumer and really spot trends, because as you can see, a lot of those businesses, I was on the forefront of various trends. I also immediately, when I would go to these new companies, would go right to where the consumer was. So I spent a lot of time in retail stores and with customers, very quickly learning and getting my own grassroots feeling for the consumer. And then, of course, I'm just a huge advocate of consumer research. So I'd either design it, or if it had there already, so I was a student always of the consumer, and that was the key that allowed me to move from industry to industry.
What's your opinion in terms of consumer buying behavior? When COVID hit, everything was forced online, right? And everybody says, "Oh, this is the death of retail." But as things open up, online sales are actually decreasing a little bit. Like a lot of the tech companies like Shopify, like they were very big during the pandemic because no one could go anywhere, so people would shop like e-commerce. But now, as things open up, it's actually not like retail didn't actually die; it's actually recovering. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first, we all went crazy during the pandemic trying to predict, oh my God, what is going to happen? Not only to just where are they going to buy, but what are they going to buy? I've been involved with a $7 billion food company, the largest in the whole private label food business. And of course, we saw all of our volume, pasta and everything go through the roof. And everybody said, oh my God, is that all just going to fall off after the pandemic? And then, like in our toy business, our business online went crazy. All those kids were home. We're all buying, and their moms were all buying them toys, which was great. And we all speculated like mad and did a lot of research. But there are certain things you can't predict about the consumer behavior. And sometimes they lie to you in terms of what they're going to do in the future. I have to say, over this holiday period where I've been monitoring our sell through so carefully in our toy business, our retail volume versus our online volume is up. So we are seeing people returning to the stores. They want to touch and feel. The other thing is, I see they want to see other people. It is an entertainment experience going into the store and shopping. But I think we've been surprised by how fast retail seems to be coming back.
Yeah, exactly. Like people had to buy online because they had no choice. But I think people tend to they want to be social, and you can't really be social by going on Amazon and buying stuff. They want to go to the mall, they want to check things out, browse, talk to people. So I think a lot of experts were underestimating the power of humans wanting to be connected.
Correct. I agree. Yeah.
And when you're changing your career directory, going to different industries, different roles, when you change and go into unfamiliar territory, there is a lot. I should say a lot. There is risk involved, right? Whether it's calculated risk or you're just gonna just jump first, think fast, plugging your book.
Yes.
Oh, how does one risk, and why is risk taking so essential in order to grow? Because again, you were
Good.
quote unquote job hopping when it wasn't that popular. As your kids would say, you were basically the millennial back in the day. How do you evaluate risks when it comes to making a career move?
Yeah, there's no question. I do all of the research up front. First, I understand if I'm going into a new business, the first thing I do is try to study what business are they really in. And frequently, and sometimes I've been involved in turnarounds. They thought they were in one business. When I did the consumer research, they were in another. In trading cards, we had all of the athletic NBA, NFL, all of their licenses, and everybody said, this is the athletic trading card business. I did the research. The consumer told me, and the kid said, no, you're in the business of connecting heroes and their fans. And that and that gave us a plan. We went to Hollywood. I went to Marvel. I went to DC comic books, and that it totally exploded. Now, I'll use a different example of when I went to Gibson Greetings. So it's sandwiched in between the Hallmark and American Greetings, two big companies, and it was getting squeezed. Sometimes when I go in, part of what I try to do is it's actually shifting a whole industry. And what I found through the consumer research was life had changed and demographics had changed. There was a lot of the population that still didn't want all the old syrup verse pink cards. You had young people, you had 50% divorce rates, you had lots of children who had four grandparents, and there weren't really proper cards and messages for them. And I also found I had 150 people doing graphics and writing verse in the company. I really eliminated all of them, and I went on the internet and started sourcing totally different people and people who lived there and understood the humor to write and do, graphics. Then we also found that our printing was obsolete. We had our own printing presses, 500 people. And I found that printing was obsoleting itself about every 3 or 4 years, and we weren't getting the quality and the new digital stuff. So I got rid of our own internal printing presses and went to the outside. We could to digital, we could change much faster, get much higher quality, etc. So that's an example where you go into an industry and a company and you make some pretty radical kind of changes, which are definitely risky because they're major when you do this. So
How do you, when you go into a new company and you want to make radical changes, as you mentioned, there is going to be pushback from people that have done it in a certain way for a new number of years. So, as my listeners who are in leadership roles, and let's say they go into a new company and they want to make some changes, there might be a lot of pushback from other workers, other leadership members of the team. So, what's your suggestion in terms of getting buy in from everybody to let them know that this is the right approach if we want to stay competitive in the market?
first thing I do is develop a strategic plan. And frequently, if the company's pretty good size, I'll bring in an outside firm, consulting firm, who's an expert in strategic strategy. Like the Parthenon Group has been with me through many of these companies. And we put together a plan. So we study the industry, we study our position in the industry, what the trends are, and then we start idea generating an alternative growth strategies because it's all about growth. So what are the alternative strategies? And then we come up with a way of being able to evaluate each one of those strategies. Now, during that whole process, I involve the management team. So it's not like hiring a consulting company. You develop a brilliant strategic plan and then dump it on the management team. Okay. So they would work with me all the way through the process. And then we would take it to the entire organization. And I would be frequently the presenter. I would put everybody in the cafeteria right down to the production floor and say, look, here's why we've got to make changes. We are not going to grow if we continue to do what we're going to do. Then the next thing is, of course, you make everybody accountable by giving them metrics for the plan that you're going to hold them to. But then, quite frankly, I do an assessment of the team and lower into the organization. There's going to be a group that's going to follow you and believe in the new plan. They'll do everything to make it work. Then there's a group that is not going to change. And incidentally, it's one of my theories I've learned. Incumbents seldom turn companies around, or they would have done it. Okay. So I then identify the people that are resistant. And if they're vocal, we basically say, look, we take them out of the company or we coach them out of the company. Because if they're detractors, will drain your batteries and the rest of the organization starts to focus on them. Then the group you got to focus on is the group in the middle are sitting on the fence trying to see if the new plan is going to work. And those are the ones I normally work on the most intently to get them to see that the plan, get them to take responsibility and see if the plan is working. But I'm also, in today's environment, you better be very agile. So we used to develop a strategic plan. Oh, we'd review it once a year. You now need to view it every 3 months. And if things don't work, you've got to be agile and willing to make major changes quickly. But as you can see, the key is not just having a great plan. You got to get and in some cases, you're missing the talent. So I would bring on new talent as well. But you got to get the organization behind you. You got to get the right people in place.
So we live in a digital world and a lot of people want instant gratification. So when it comes to implementing new tactics and strategies, how do you know if it's not actually working or if you haven't tested it long enough to get the results?
Yeah, it's interesting. Testing is an interesting word. When I was with Carnation and grew up in a highly disciplined environment for new products, we tested everything and we tested concepts and then advertising. I used to be involved with watching eye camera tests on new commercials for new products. We did test markets and all. No time for that any longer. You've got to move much more quickly. So we're much more on what I call the air correct side. Okay. So, yes, but we measure, but we're on the move and we're implementing the strategy as we're measuring and seeing if it's working. If it isn't, we'll clip off and stop pieces and we'll shift to new areas. We have all the metrics, all the consumer metrics we track all the way through, but we don't have the time anymore to do test markets and a lot of the stuff I really grew up with. Now we're in the marketplace and we're very flexible in the marketplace.
Great. The one thing you were talking about is getting like buy-in from people to agree with the new vision or strategy of the company. And one of the themes that you have done throughout your story, your career story, is the relationships that you have built. A lot of professionals, especially ones that are coming up, they focus more on working hard to get noticed. But there is another aspect of it, which is building relationships. So, can you walk us through your experience in building relationships to generate you the opportunities that you have gained in your career?
The most fortunate thing that can happen to you early on in your career is that you get a good mentor, and hopefully that mentor is actually in the company and somebody who sees your potential and works with you. The other, I'll call them supporters, okay? People that are supporting your growth in your career and ultimately are willing to take risks by putting you in positions where you're going to develop much faster, and also an environment that doesn't penalize people for failures, that said, okay, that didn't work, you go ahead, let's try something else. But the personal relationships, I would say almost all of my major moves to other companies or promotions came through someone who I did develop a very personal relationship with and knew me very well and said, Frank, mindset over skill set. We have faith in you. We're going to take a risk. And the big break for me was a fellow by the name of Bob Kirby in the baking business who gave me the crack at my first general manager job running a whole operation in the Northwest bakeries, hundreds of people, complex operation. And that put me on a whole new plateau. But again, it's so much as relationship. I encourage everyone. I understand the internet, the power of the internet, whatever. But particularly when you get into recruiting for jobs and making those switches, is find and make personal conduct and continue to develop and hang on to those over time, because you'll be very surprised how you're going to come back someplace in your career and need them.
Obviously, online job boards didn't exist when you started your career. So, can you walk us through like how you got those opportunities? That you did mention it briefly, but how did you like pivot from like, going to Reebok or HBO, those companies? Like, what was the catalyst to help you get there?
Number one, I'll say one of the major cows was reputation. So early on, I got known, right, wrong, or indifferent, I got known as a marketing expert, a really creative person who thought out of the box, and someone who was very strategic in my thinking. And if I could say anything, it is why everybody else is wallowing around in tactics. Try, even early in your career, try to get above all of that and think strategically, and also know, ask the right questions. A lot of that movement is a company needed a new strategic direction, and I got to be known as the strategic creative guy and also could attract good management talent. So that was a critical part of all of those movements.
The one thing about what about online now with social media is about building your personal brand. Like that's a big thing right now in the career space. Many people just want to apply online for jobs, get the job, and then work the job. They don't want to like build a reputation, build a personal brand. Where do you see where do you see the career development phase go into the next few years? Do you think that personal brand is a fad, or do you think that everybody needs to build a personal brand if they want to get the opportunities that they want in their career?
Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of building your personal brand in the current environment and in the future environment. Part of that is get to be known for something where you can be viewed as an expert. And it may not be obviously directly work related. It may be in something else that you're doing or you're started, or athleticism or something else, but get to be known as an expert. And then really, you want to keep building your experiences and getting your ideas out online. Try to come up with profound thinking. I think that, for example, someone just asked me to read very young woman in her career, in her first job, her LinkedIn. And I've got to say, she had really perfected being able to express who she was and what's different about her. And that's another critical thing. I always, when I'm on the other side and I'm interviewing, I always say, okay, lots of people come to me with great resumes, with great academics. They've perfected the resume writing technique. I say, tell me in 5 lines what is different and unique about you. Part of that is I encourage early on, who are you? Who really are you? Do you really know yourself? The trick in life is you can see everybody else. We can't see ourselves. Are you just following the herd coming out of school? Have you really thought about what companies and what your fit for you really is? And then I want to see that you're genuine. So that's all. And can you express that somehow as your personal, come out and express that as your personal brand?
So going to that, obviously throughout your career, you've hired a lot of people. I don't want to dive into the technical aspect of like how to answer interview questions, but from a personality perspective, you did touch upon this just now. What are you really looking for when you interview people, and how do you select the right hire for that role?
Certainly we're looking for good, strong basic intelligence, and but much more what I'm looking for now is somebody who is flexible, who's got the right mindset, who can learn quickly, who's flexible, who can work with others, who is adaptable and can switch quickly. I'll tell you the other thing, I have a bias, and my bias is humor and fun. So I also look for, is this person, I say, be fun, have fun. People want to work with people who are positive and are fun loving. So I try to look for that sense of humor in. Let me give you one other little, this will be very different. Flipping on the other side, when I'm coaching people going into the interview, I find I have one thing that's very different that they seldom get from anybody else is what you want to do is leave the interviewer feeling better about themselves than when you walked into the interview. People hire people that are like them, much more like them, that we're humans. So I say, as quickly as you can, try to learn something. Make sure you do your research on who the interviewer is and their background and what their hooks are, etc. But then ask them just a couple of key questions. Why did you join the company? Tell me just a little about, you've had a great career. If you start with that with an interviewer, telling them they've had a great career, and then they start letting you know what they think is really important, and you can then start to steer into that in the interview. But if they walk away from that interview somehow feeling better about themselves, then you've got a much better chance.
You made a good point about people want to work with people they like, right? A lot of professionals, they focus so much on their expertise and how they can deliver value that they completely forget about trying to build connection rapport with the interviewers. They cover both bases. They cover their expertise and that they'd be a good person to work with on the team. A lot of people forget the latter part of that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. Then, how can you add value to the company? The one thing is make sure do your homework on that company, inside and out. And the worst is I've had people come to me, and when I start to feel I'm explaining basics about the company that they don't know, then they haven't done their homework, and I'd say tilt. They didn't have enough interest to really do it. And what really impresses me when I'm in the consumer products business, somebody walks in, well, let's say it's a food category, and they've studied the company. And then if they told me last week I visited 15 stores and looked at your product, bingo. Do something above and beyond what most people do just sitting in front of the computer.
Yeah, exactly. If you say you know about the company and you just briefly talk about the products, it's not going to be as impactful as you like going into their store or testing their product because then you're really immersed into it. I think the saying lack of research shows a lack of interest.
Yes, I agree. Yes.
And yeah, a lot of my listeners fall into the entry level middle management stage. Some of these professionals are high achievers and they're looking to become CEO or C suite or somewhere in a very high level executive leadership position at the company that they want to work for. So, with that being said, what are some skills that you recommend someone develop now so they will be ready for that role when that time comes?
It's a little hard to express, but it's definitely leadership and the ability to clearly express a concept or a path or a direction. And that comes under the category is no matter what, you're always going to be selling. So, can you be very influential in presenting a point of view and getting people to agree with you and follow you? So, in the other skill I will mention is, and I've been fortunate here, the ability to be able in a group to speak and present a very strong and perhaps different point of view, or to be able to ask a wildly insightful question when everybody else is in the fray of, again, tactical stuff. If you can just drop back and ask, you're not arguing with anybody or anything that's been presented, is to ask at the end an insightful question. And I normally also learned as a young person, speak last. Then you hear what everybody else has had to say. They don't feel like they're competing with you. And then you can present that killer insight.
One of
But
the
it's critical going forward. You've got to get people, convince people to follow you. Yeah.
uh
Hey, let me mention one other one. This
oh,
is
sure.
extremely important and always is you, I'm very big on performance reviews and feedback, etc. But convincing people that work for you that you care about their personal development and that in your reviews you have a plan for their personal development, to me now is absolutely critical. I When somebody walks into my office, I always establish, I'm first concerned about you and your personal development. Let's talk about that. Then let's talk about the company and the fit.
Okay, for sure. And one of the things I wanted to bring up was the talk about speaking last, right? But some professionals have a problem speaking up. If let's say they're in a group meeting, people are talking and they want to add in their 2 cents, but they're nervous in terms of like interrupting. So how do you establish that confidence where you can speak up and people are willing to listen to you?
Does develop into a talent, but I think if you can start early taking that risk, you'll start to gain confidence. And then the people around you will also, you'll suddenly start to find that if you're in those comments, you're really adding value. One of the things I learned was along in my career, suddenly when I spoke, the room was very quiet. And I knew that's when I had them, that they were really intently listening to my point of view. And it's definitely a skill, but you just have got to take the risks early on, and you'll make mistakes. You'll speak at the wrong time or everybody will jump on you or whatever. You have to get used to that, but you'll start to develop that skill of being able to speak. And I always say, speak clearly, be very articulate. The other thing is, I've raised tons and tons of money. Passion is for the product and the company goes a long way. So if they can see and understand your passion when you're making your comments, you're not talking about you, but you're talking about the company and the product and the future, then people see your heart's in the right spot.
Going back to like making mistakes and taking risks, a lot of professionals, especially the ones that are coming up, they're very risk averse. They want to be perfect, right? They don't want to make mistakes. They fear failure. So, how do you, like, what's some advice that you can give in regards to getting out of that like perfectionism mindset and making mistakes? Because everybody's worried about making a mistake and then feeling like a failure and then might
Yeah,
look down upon, they might get passed off for promotions. So,
yeah,
there's a lot going on with that.
yeah.
What are some encouraging words or advice that you can provide in terms of it's okay to make mistakes?
Well, I'll say now, in my book, Jump First, Think Fast, what's unique is I think about it is I just don't tell people, do this one, two, three, and four. I read all those books on that. Mine is all based on my personal experiences and situations. And I go through my failures as well as my successes and then how I came out of that. And of course, what I learned was that basically, you know, coming out of each one of those, I never ended up worse off on any one of those failures, either inside a company or if I got fired. I always ended up with a better job. And that, everybody kids me used to call it falling forward. And sometimes you just got to get the experiences of having a few of the failures and then recovering, and you'll see, God, you get on a different plane or plateau. The biggest thing is you gain self confidence in yourself. That's the critical part. That's the piece you don't want to ever have damaged. So I'll tell you, when I'm interviewing and people come to me and in their resume, there's failures. First, I like it because we're going to hit a lot of challenges. It develops grit and understanding and an ability to deal with adversity. So I like that there are failures in there. The main thing I will look for is they quickly tell me, yes, I didn't succeed, and here's why, and then we move on. What I don't want them to do is keep talking about the failure or justification that somebody else is at fault. I want to make sure that it didn't damage their self confidence. That's the most critical part.
You're speaking about getting fired. Have you ever had a failure that was so bad that you end up getting fired? And if so, like, how did you recover from that?
Yeah, it's not in the case. Reebok is, of course, everybody studies that as an interesting one because I had developed the pump. I had a brand new 3-year contract, had just been given to me. And Paul Fireman, the founder, had been out of the company with health issues, came back in, and I had put in a professional management team. He basically took out the whole professional management team and went back to, he was an entrepreneur with no large company experience. He was just uncomfortable with the team. And there's one where I failed to really build a relationship with him. Of course, he was in Florida playing golf a good deal of the time. But that was definitely, that was a high profile failure situation. But then I went to Skybox that had lost $80 million and we did an incredible turnaround, took it public, and everybody made tons of money. You got to move on to the next situation. So
One of the things that is very important in someone's career is to be yourself, be authentic, do work that aligns with your values. But a lot of people end up chasing extrinsic rewards like higher salary, bigger title, all that stuff, but not really staying true to who they are. So, how do you find something that you're genuinely interested in, and how do you like case your full self at work without worry about being judged?
the first goes back to know yourself. And I'm dealing with not a lot of people early in their career, but I'm doing now a lot of people in the middle of their career making career path changes. And what they really didn't do was get a very clean assessment on who they are, what their strengths are, weaknesses are, and identifying their passions. So that to me is such a critical starting place in terms of finding out what is the right environment for you really to succeed and being selective on really finding that path. So
Great. We briefly touched upon your book, Jump First, Think Fast. Why don't you tell us more about the significance of the title? What made you want to write this book? And what are some points that you want people to take away from the book if they end up purchasing it and reading it?
yeah, the reason I wrote it was first, I've been fortunate. I've had a very exciting career. I've also moved 20 times back and forth across the country. I've led either as president or CEO 10 companies in totally different industries. And what I found was that just like the questions you're asking me, people became mesmerized with how did I make all of these? How did I make all of these changes from industry to industry and situation and working through successes and failures? In particular, my two millennial sons, I would find they would bring these young people to the house. We'd have dinner, and all of a sudden we'd be into this conversation. And then they'd say, Dad, could you help in terms of their own career path? I did 4 years ago a 250-page outline where I just wrote all the stories. It's all stories about my career. But what it is basically to encourage people to take risks. Again, I'm a believer that most people only use about 30% of their life because they aren't taking risks to develop totally personally, professionally, etc. And then the other part is it really is mentoring. So it is a book that indirectly mentors, but through my experiences. So my whole goal on this is one, to write a book that's fun and entertaining and not preaching, but where inadvertently now, as I'm getting all the feedback, people say, whoa, people who've worked for me in the past said, Frank, I never forgot this term or that term in this direction or what, etc. I've incorporated that into my style. My reason for writing it is really hopefully you leave something as a mentorship. And again, it's unusual. A lot of people don't write about their failures. And there's a lot to be learned from that, and you're going to have them. If you're trying hard enough, you're going to have them. And you asked me some other things. I have some mantras, and my mantra is smile, use humor. I use it a lot to diffuse difficult situations and to get things back on the human side. And if you're doing entrepreneurship or anything else, you have got to be enthusiastic and stay forever positive. Stay positive. It will just keep you in mentally in such good stead. I'll mention one other thing is that physically staying healthy. I work out 7 days a week, and I've done it my entire career totally consistently. It just starts you in the morning in a much healthier spot and keep your body healthy. And then my last one is be fun, have fun.
Yeah, like just going back to the health thing, right? A lot of people focus so much on trying to build their careers, they neglect their health. And then when they make all that money, they have to reinvest it in their health because they neglected their health over the years. Frank, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on my podcast to share about your career experiences, your book. I think a lot of listeners will get a lot of value if they choose to purchase it. I wanted to end this conversation with one last question that I ask all my guests. As my podcast is about helping professionals overcome career challenges. So for you, you do have a very elaborate career story. So what has been one big challenge that you had to overcome in your career to get to where you are today?
I'll tell you a very personal one. When I went to Cornell, I was 18 years old. I had my first child in my first semester. 2 years later, I had a second child. It was going on and double registering and getting a master's with two young children. Okay. And then I was married for about 6 years. I got into my career, and my first wife decided that she didn't want to be married to a junior executive and move all over the country. So that was a big, then dealing with that, a divorce situation and raising your children and moving all over. That was the biggest challenge. And then, of course, I was very fortunate to have met my current wife. We've had a wonderful extended family. We've raised actually the two children from my first marriage as well as our two children. That was a challenge.
What is some actually? Let's touch upon this quickly. What's some advice we have when it comes to relationships and career? What's something that you wish you knew when you were younger?
Let me say the first thing is in that balance, make sure that the most important decision you'll probably ever make is really the choice of a partner, because you're frequently going to have at least two careers or two really important lives that you've really got to bring together that are not going to always be balanced, etc. So to me, that choice is critically important. And incidentally, what I used to do when somebody would get fired and would call me and they hadn't gone home, said, go home tonight. You and your partner take a piece of paper, each write down your 5 important goals now in life. It could be spiritual, yes, it could be money, family, whatever. Then flip them over. That is going to give you the most valuable discussion you're ever going to have, and figure out then where does career and job fit into those.
Great. Again, I appreciate the time, Frank. So, how can people go purchase your book? And if there's any other things that you want to share with my audience, feel free to do so.
It's jumpfirstthinkfast.com. We'll tell you the bookstores and how to get the book, or on Amazon now, it just is available as in the Audible form as well. So that is another way to get it. My final piece of advice, probably in this crazy environment that none of us have ever seen before and are going through, I think you just got to stay hopeful and positive. I'm very positive. I get all these questions on the economy and what's going on. And I say, all the corporate environment that I am, and I'm dealing with China and all other countries, is very healthy. We're actually doing very well. So I'm saying, yeah, you got to be optimistic and hopeful. And then also, particularly for young people, do what you can to change it and make it even more positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's a lot of things going on right now, like discussion about the recession and all that, but you can't really control that, but you can control your actions and you can get the outcome you want based off the actions you take.
Correct. Yes.
Great. Again, I appreciate the time and all the best for the rest of the year.
To you as well. Thanks, Max.
Thank you so much for watching. For more content on careers, job search, and self-improvement, make sure to hit that subscribe button.